Hey guys, we're doing this recording for MEC Community. I wanted to know specifically what cold emailing, cold outreach is like today in 2017, and I wanted to know from experts exactly what they're doing. I've been tasked with finding new clients and getting a sales team running for an organization that reached out to me. And I want to know specifically how this is being done. And so I reached out to the experts, and here I got foremost is Simon here. And he runs a company called Content Kite before, where he learned how to do cold emailing, cold outreach to go ahead and get people in this business. And I'll let him go ahead and do an introduction because he's going to be much better than I in doing that. But he pretty much knows what he's talking about, and I'd highly recommend checking out some of his stuff just to see the information that he has on cold outreach because it's pretty beneficial.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Sean. So I am obviously Australian, and I one day decided that I wanted to move to the States and start my own content agency there. So being that I wasn't living in the States for quite some time, I didn't have, things like referrals or even a professional network of any kind to start my own business. So really the only option I had was to start with cold outreach. And so I knew a little bit about, cold emailing and cold calling. Like I'd had a cold calling job in college. I knew I didn't want to go down the cold calling route just because it sucks. I mean, I think anyone who's done it, I think knows it sucks. Yes, it does work, but I decided to make, cold emailing the main channel. So I just started emailing a bunch of companies. And at the time I was doing it, one-to-one, really personalized individual emails, and it worked. It was a huge time commitment, but if you email enough companies, it is, in some sense a numbers game. And if you just, use the right copy and you're emailing the right person, it's that cliche of like right message, right person, right time, then you can get customers that way. To cut a long story short, we continue to get clients to this day via those methods. And now we've incorporated LinkedIn outreach as well. But we were having conversations with clients and they would ask us, the ones we had good relationships with, how are you guys getting clients? And we talk about these outreach methods. And, to cut a long story short, we ended up incorporating this service of cold outreach as part of our offering within Content Kite. So we were actually doing that for clients, and then it just sort of became apparent that it would make a bit more sense to separate that as a separate brand. So now we actually have our own fully blown lead generation agency where we specialize in cold outreach, and that's called Growth Assembly. So that's sort of my background in a nutshell and how I got involved in all this.
Okay. And I specifically, I do neurolinguistic programming. I teach it to other people, and I want to know specifically the structure of success. And so part of the reason I reached out to you is because I could see noticeable results and exactly what you're doing, the specifics. While some marketing on the internet today, it's hard to actually glean exactly what's going on. But I can notice in speaking with you and having those conversations, it's apparent there. What I want to ask you first is when you had first started this process and you had said that it was time consuming, maybe you were finding people on the internet and then you just started reaching out, writing individual emails. How exactly did that go for you?
Yeah, so there's no question that writing individual one-to-one emails to companies that you want to work with is the best way to go about this. But if you've ever done that before, it takes a hell of a lot of time. So I was setting myself a goal of sending 50 emails a day. And even that can take like most of the day. If you're doing the proper research and, doing everything involved with that, that will take you a long time to write really good emails, but you'll get the best results from it. What we then started doing is, as I was writing those emails, I noticed that about 90% of it ended up being the same kind of thing anyway. So, the bit where I would talk about, the services we provide and this, that, and the other would all be the same. And I'd just be adding a piece at the top to sort of show that I had done my homework. And in a way, it was kind of personalization for personalization's sake. What I then sort of figured out how to do was kind of personalize at scale. So if for people who are doing cold emailing and who have a bit of experience with this, know that there are automation platforms that you can use you can set up templates, and you can key in a few variables like first name and company name, and make it seem kind of personalized, but it's not really personalized. You're just using their first name and their company name. But if you are able to take a list that you have of companies and segment that in an intelligent way, and write separate copy for each segment of that list, you can achieve this goal of what I call personalization at scale, where you can create the impression that you're sending one-to-one emails where you may be sending it to hundreds. And I'd be happy to go through the exact details of say a case study of how we do that if you like. But.
Okay, and so when you had started and you're doing about 50 a day, what would you say about the success rate in that was when you're just getting going?
Yeah, so when you're writing really personalized emails, as in the entire thing is personalized, it's really clear that you've done your homework. Out of 50 emails, you should get about at least 10 or 20 replies. And they won't all be interested in your service replies, but it's like hey, I appreciate you taking the time to write this email kind of reply. We're not interested, but thanks anyway. But out of that, I mean, I was getting about 5, phone calls out of that from 50 emails a day. And then, going on from there, it depends on things like, how you convert when you get them on the phone, and et cetera, et cetera. But when you're writing really individualized emails, you should be getting about 10% of those people on the phone.
Okay.
Then when you want to scale that up and automate parts of the process, that's obviously going to drop, but you save yourself about 90% of the time commitment, and your results drop by less than 90%. So, I'd say, the results probably only drop about 20 to 30%. So there's an advantage to be had in that scale if you're doing it intelligently, because the cold outreach game has certainly changed. So I guess I'll go into kind of this mechanic that we use for this personalization at scale that we use, but to use the case study of Content Kite. So one of our main audiences is app development companies. And so we'd be reaching out to app development companies and saying things like, hey, we work with app development companies, we create content, we generate inbound leads and traffic, et cetera, for app development companies. And that's one layer of personalization that you can use. It's no longer we help businesses do this, it's we help app development companies do this. So that's one layer. Then we took the next step, and so a lot of app development companies either don't have a blog already, or they have an okay blog, or they might have a really good blog. And the messaging that you want to use for, say, an app development company that doesn't have a blog is very different to an app development company that has a really good blog, if you're pitching a content marketing service. So for example, if an app development company didn't have a blog, we'd be pitching them more on the benefits of creating content to attract new traffic, leads, customers, etc. Whereas if we were talking to an app development company that had an amazing blog already, they don't need to be sold on the benefits of content marketing, because they obviously know that they're doing this really consistently. The benefit of outsourcing it to an agency for them is to, make it more efficient, to save costs by not hiring in-house, to, have a team for the same price that they could hire one single person. So that messaging that we would write to a company that already has a really good blog is incredibly different to the messaging we'd use to a company that doesn't have a blog. So if we could say something like, I noticed you don't have a blog. We've actually found that when app development companies implement a blog, they can increase their inbound traffic by X, Y, and Z. That email can be sent to hundreds, if not thousands, of app development companies, but it seems like we've done the homework on their specific company, because we've called out things like, they don't have a blog, they're an app development company, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I mean by this, personalization at scale. You're personalizing the email where it matters.
Okay. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. And another question I have is you probably did some of the content. Are you a copywriter background or?
So I, from my corporate job, I was in content marketing strategy, so I don't tend to write content myself, but I know
Okay.
what good content is. So yeah, I generally come up with the strategies, and we now have a team in place that also does that, but we outsource the copywriting to writers.
So when you had first started out, you did have some degree of at least some kind of copywriting to write effective emails. I mean, how would you rate your
Yes.
level of copywriting or email writing at that point when you first started?
At the time, probably about a 5 or 6,
Okay.
and now I like to think that's improved significantly after doing it, as much as I have. Yeah.
Okay. And did you find that your success went up before you started automating it, where you just kind of got better and better and you understood maybe the patterns or what people were responding to in your emails? Did you see yourself getting noticeably better conversion rates as far as phone calls and responses or?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, as you go on, you sort of start to realize what people do and don't care about when you reach out to them. So yeah, 100%.
Okay.
I think the number one thing I noticed was, I mean, if you read a lot of information on the internet about cold emailing, it'll all say, don't go longer than 3 or 5 sentences, and be to the point, and don't sugarcoat things, and be really direct. And I actually found that to not be the case. I found, if you can write a somewhat entertaining, value driven email, that gets a much better response than these short, punchy, you know hey, you need this, we've got this, let's jump on a call together. These really direct. I find, I mean, certainly when I get emails like that, I just, like, something inside me goes like, ugh, like, like that, this is kind of gross. Whereas if I can see someone's taking the time to write like a somewhat entertaining email, maybe they've weaved in a bit of humor, that's, definitely an important part of it. And there's some level of them talking to me and my specific situation. Those are the ones that resonate the best.
Okay. And so you'd say maybe primarily one of the keyest drivers or probably the key to it is making sure that it's personalized to somebody. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, personalized to the person's situation. So I used to do things like research the person and say, I came across this article in Forbes that you wrote, that's great, really loved your take on this, that, and the other. And I think a lot of people do that and tout that as good advice. And it's not necessarily bad advice, but what inevitably ends up happening is people go, okay, I need to be personalized in this email. They search for an article that the person's written, look for a soundbite that they can call out in the email for the sake of calling it out in the email. So they don't really care about what that person wrote in that. Where I think personalization counts is where I can, to go back to the example of, writing to an app development company that doesn't have a blog versus one that has a really good blog. If I'm speaking to the pain point they may be experiencing in the context of content marketing, that's sort of the personalization that counts. And that is something that you can scale up and automate.
And I imagine the biggest challenge in that is just making sure, because I mean that's pretty hard to do, is find the exact message for the right person at exactly the right time. And so that's why.
Exactly. It's the right time bit that is the hardest thing to get right, because you can get a great message and you can find someone who could potentially use your service, but where you need to play the numbers game is due to that right time factor, because yeah, you can just never know when it's the right time, or you can. There are certain things you can do to maybe improve your chances, but at the end of the day, there has to be a numbers game component to this, because you just need to, yeah, keep hitting companies until you find one that needs what you offer now.
Okay.
Mm.
And you had said something about it being a little bit entertaining. While it was personalization, it was also entertaining for them.
Yeah, so this is actually something I've come across somewhat recently, I'd say within the last year. Certainly after I was doing cold email for a while, but this is championed by a guy called John Buchan. Some of the community may be familiar with his stuff, but he essentially uses like insane humor throughout his emails. So his emails, you look at his templates and they're just like, it's like a stand-up comedian has written it. And he actually has a stand-up comedy background. And to someone who hasn't tested this kind of copy, you would look at an email that he sent and go, you have got to be kidding me. You are a madman. There is absolutely no way that will work. You know, we're emailing CEOs and, you know, heads of marketing and all that kind of thing. But you test it out and it works. And when you think about it, and I'm stealing a quote from John here, when you think about it, when someone becomes a CEO, they don't stop enjoying humor. Like everyone loves humor. And if you can do it in the right way and still, you know, communicate, you know, the value you can provide, but just weave in sort of elements of entertaining, then that makes you stand out, because there are a lot of cold emails going out these days, and most people just end up switching off to them because they're all exactly the same. So if you can add some flair to yours, you know, while still obviously getting to the point in some way or another, then yeah, it ramps up your response rates significantly.
Okay. What would you
Mm.
recommend to somebody that might not have some kind of humor background or who has difficulty with humor? Would you say maybe find a template or maybe do some looking around to see what other people are doing as far as what's funny or what's entertaining to somebody else?
Yeah, definitely. So I actually have a resource on my website for this exact purpose, because while I do think everyone can learn to be funny, at least in copywriting, you know, it's good to just have some thought starters. So, you know, I don't recommend that everyone do these really long-winded, funny emails if you're not really expert at doing it. But just, you know, include a couple of lines, and I'll link up to this resource that we've got. It's just got about 10 lines that you can use as openers, and you can tweak them, and it just adds a little extra something to your emails that not everyone else is doing. And that's really the key thing, because it is a crowded channel. There's nothing wrong with the channel, but it's becoming less effective just due to the fact that so many people are doing it and doing the same thing. So if you can just add even a one-liner at the top of your email, that's going to make you stand out more than the next guy who's doing it.
Okay.
Mm.
Say I'm an agency that's watching this, whether it's SEO, whether it's website design, whether it's a copywriter, and they need to get more clients. What would you
Mm.
suggest their first steps are to go ahead and get started with doing cold outreach?
Yeah, so I'd actually suggest starting with LinkedIn. Um, LinkedIn, writing the same message on LinkedIn, as in, you know, a short connection message followed by a, you know, a longer follow-up message, will just get a significantly higher response rate. The copywriting principles are more or less the same. There are certain nuances that people need to keep in mind. But like email, you can automate the first part of the process. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not saying you are like automating relationships and making this a completely automated, you know, scalable thing. But I think there is a place to automate the getting to, hello, can you tell me more about what you do? And from there, it should all be human. But LinkedIn automation to getting that conversation started is by far and away 2017, 2018, the biggest opportunity in lead generation there's been for quite some time. Everyone reads their LinkedIn messages. Yes, there are spammers out there, but more people read LinkedIn messages than they do their emails, certainly cold ones.
Okay.
Mm.
So let's say, for instance, I do SEO and I want this client, this guy that I reached out to on LinkedIn, I want him to be interested in my services. What does it take for that to happen?
Yeah. So the number one thing that we say to our clients is just get that conversation started. So, I don't claim to be an SEO expert, so I can't say what you should put in that outreach email, but really you shouldn't be talking too much about SEO. You should just be talking about a benefit like, can you be interested in, or would you be interested in increasing your organic traffic? We recently did something similar for a company like yours, and call out one of their competitors or someone else in the industry. Would you like to know more? It's really just about starting the conversation and getting to the phone in whichever way you can. And then once you're on the phone, you have a much better chance of, actually pitching what you do and going through your actual process. But the key should be to start a conversation and to create intrigue about what you do. And I've found the best way to do that is to use social proof. So say you're an SEO company and you want to go after I'm blanking, a supermarket. So we recently helped another supermarket increase their organic traffic by 10%. I think we could do the same for you. If you'd be interested in a 10-15 minute phone call, we could see if we're a right fit. So it's not overly pushy. It's not saying we do this. It's just creating intrigue of, oh, okay, well, they've already done this for another company. We would like that result. Yeah, sure. Tell me more. And then from there, it's, nurturing that relationship.
Okay, I would agree, and I'd even add and just say that they don't care about SEO, they don't care about copywriting, they don't care about website design, but they care about what it's going to do for them. The
Mm-hmm.
benefit that it's going to add, whether that's more revenue, whether that's more people seeing them, whether they look more professional on the internet. They're really after not the service, but what the service will do for them.
Yeah, it's that old adage of you don't buy a 10 millimeter drill, you buy a 10 millimeter hole or whatever it is. You're buying the outcome. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say I have reasonable success on LinkedIn and I want to try the email platform. What's my next steps? Let's say I'm a copywriter or anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where do I start?
So there are a few different ways you can. So the two things you need are a list. So, like a targeted list of prospects, and copy. So starting with the list, there are a few different ways you can go about it. There are three main methods, and two of them I don't really recommend. So one is to buy a list from a vendor, and that's just a no-no, and that's generally considered to be a no-no, in the cold email world. So you'll just get high bounce rates and poor quality data in general. There are exceptions to the rule, but wouldn't recommend it. Then there's prospecting tools, which you can definitely have success with. So this would be something like a Find That Lead or Lead Fuse, and they essentially go out and search public databases. Some of them go on LinkedIn and find email addresses that way, and they'll collate a big list for you for a relatively low cost. That works, but you'll get some low quality data. And if you're just starting out with this, and especially if you have a small pool to work with, I wouldn't recommend that. The best way to do it is to build it either yourself or have a VA build one from scratch. So literally Google around for databases, find companies that match the criteria who you want to work with, and visit their website, look around, find the decision maker, find the actual person who's going to make the call on your service, and manually find their email address. And the cost of that is higher than using something like a prospecting tool or buying a list, but the data pays for itself many times over, because you're nailing that part about messaging the right person, so you don't get things like bounce rates, and you ensure that scraping tools mess up, and they also don't do things like you can say things to a VA like, if their website looks really scrappy, or like it hasn't been maintained in years, then don't include that on the list. you can't tell that to a prospecting tool. So the lowest cost per lead in the end will be the best when you build a list from scratch using human people to do it rather than a prospecting tool. So if that makes sense, so the prospecting tool will get you a lower cost per email, but the actual people responding to your emails and turning into potential leads will be lower if you spend a little more and get a good list. So that would be
So,
the first.
so it pays to do your research essentially.
Exactly. The next step is to write good copy, and that's like a very general piece of advice, and there's a lot that needs to be taken into account. But if you use a platform like Mailshake is the one that we use for most of our stuff, but there are platforms like QuickMail, LeadFuse, that you essentially write up this template and then you can insert variables from your list like first name, company name, and that kind of thing. And then the next level from that is doing what I mentioned before, is personalizing at scale. So rather than just using this one list and writing the same copy to the entire list, find something where you can divide that list into sections and write a separate segment of copy for each section of the list, just so it seems more personalized to that particular person that you're sending to. And then obviously do things like, weave in subtle humor where you can, and just do things to stand out. I mean, a lot of people will say, don't use images. I use images. I put memes in my cold emails and they get really good responses, and people actually reply and they're like, you know what, this is great. Like I never respond to cold emails, but you piqued my interest, and we're actually kind of looking into this thing now. Yep. Tell me more.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, there's plenty more to it than that, and more than I can sort of talk about in a 30 or 40-minute podcast. But I've got some resources that we can link up and post in the comments potentially after this.
Yeah, sure. And let's say that I went along this path. Maybe I'm a website designer. I want more clients, and what I notice is that it's successful, and LinkedIn works, email works. I'm getting clients. When would I need to know that what I'm doing needs to be better, or I'm getting results and I could get more better results?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, there aren't general benchmarks to follow, but it's always going to vary by industry. But in general, a 5% conversion rate to lead should be something you should aim for. So it can be higher than that. It can be lower than that, depending on your industry. But I'd throw that out as a general term. If you're sending 100 emails and you're getting less than 5 people come back to you and say, yes, tell me more about your service, then you should maybe think about how you can improve that.
Okay. And if we're looking at the structure of it, what we're looking at is essentially the list, the copy, which the copy we had said is probably going to be such things as a little bit of humor, a little bit of entertainment, but more importantly is personalization. So we have the list, we have the copy, which include those two things. And then we
Yep.
send those out 100 a day. We should have about 5 people that are reaching back out to us at least.
Yeah, so I generally don't recommend sending more than 50 emails a day. It'll just make your list last longer. Obviously you'll get less leads in a short amount of time, but if you're a business owner, you've got a ton of things to do. And when leads come in, you need to be quite astute in responding to them. So I tend to just suggest not overloading yourself by sending hundreds or thousands of emails a day. Some people literally are sending thousands of emails a day, and their copy must be really terrible because, they tend to be getting low lead rates. But the one thing I would also add to that, which I should have mentioned before, was the call to action. So the key thing for mine is where I've gotten the best sort of conversion rate to leads is in your initial outreach, don't ask for a phone call. Ask for a reply. So, would you like to know more about this? Or, would you be interested in hearing how we did this for this other company that's like yours? I think just the notion of, someone going like, I don't know this guy and he wants to jump on the phone with me, like is just a bit more of a mental barrier than, reply yes or no. And then once you've got that yes or no, then, they may end up suggesting a call themselves, or it eventually gets to that anyway. But if you just create as little friction as possible in the call to action, that tends to get the best results in my experience.
Okay.
Mm. Yeah. So good list, good copy, personalize, and a soft call to action, if I had to sum it all up.
Okay. Yeah, that's beautifully done there.
Mm.
Any other last comments that you might have? I'm pretty much well educated on this now. For me, this has been a great chance and opportunity for me to understand exactly the structure and how this works. And so you summed it up really well there. I don't even need to go further. That's pretty much exactly what I was looking for. The keys to success after looking at all that is just making sure that you have the good list, making sure that you have maybe a little bit of entertainment in there, making sure that it's personalized, and then making sure that there's a soft call to action. From there, we can go ahead and scale up, right?
Yeah, that's it. And, like there are infinite ways you can write your copy and there are infinite ways you can build a list. So the key is like, I'm constantly trying to improve this process over time, and it's never going to be as good as it can, you're never going to master it. You can always get better. So yeah, just constant improvement, I guess, would be one principle that everyone should take into account.
Okay. And then any final keys as far as the scaling process, or just make sure that you use one of those tools and personalize in the different sections, you'd say?
Yeah, definitely. So email is definitely more scalable than LinkedIn, just in terms of the messaging, the automation platforms that are available. So, with LinkedIn, there are obvious restraints about LinkedIn not wanting people sending thousands of messages. So they monitor that kind of thing. Whereas email can be scaled up, essentially to the size of your market if you can collect all those email addresses. So, but I'd say for anyone starting out, start with LinkedIn, and then if you really want to scale up, past the amount of messages that you're sending, or you can't find those people on LinkedIn, then go to email. But they both work. LinkedIn just sort of has this added advantage of still being early days for cold outreach, whereas email tends to be a bit more crowded.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, this has been fantastic. Any final words from you? I know you do this kind of thing for clients over at Growth Assembly. Any other things you'd like to add?
I mean, other than I can probably elaborate on this in this fairly lengthy guide that we've written up. So maybe we can drop that in the comments. But it's, if you search Growth Assembly B2B lead generation guide, that should come up, and that pretty much goes deep on everything we've talked about here, including some other things. So how to build a list, how to write copy, how to use entertainment, and how you can incorporate some one-liners, et cetera, et cetera. So I direct people to that if they want to know more. And of course, just send me an email if anyone wants to know more. I'm not, so internet famous that I don't respond to emails. I'll respond to every one of them. I'm not internet famous at all. So yeah, Simon@growthassembly.com, and I'll answer any questions anyone has.
And that guide is absolute money. I mean, total content value right there. It's well worth the read, and not in there is any kind of fluff or anything. It's just all actionable stuff that you can use. So I'd highly recommend that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Cheers. And thank you very much for having me on. It's awesome to chat with you.
It's been great. This is going to help me in my endeavor, and I'm sure this is going to help everybody in the community as well.